The frozen wind howling through the pines carried more than just snow that night. It carried the sound of labored breathing and stumbling footsteps that made Zachary Denholm look up sharply from the meager fire in his root hut. He had heard many things in his 3 years living alone on the northern frontier, but never something quite like this, something that sounded both wounded and desperate, moving closer through the trees. His hand went instinctively to the hunting knife at his belt as he rose from his crouch by the flames, his breath clouding in the frigid air that seeped through every crack in the roughly hewn walls of his tiny dwelling. The footsteps stopped just outside, followed by a heavy thud against the door that made the whole structure shudder. Zachary's heart hammered as he approached cautiously, knowing that whatever waited on the other side could easily be a threat. Bandits had been spotted in the region, and worse things prowled these woods when winter drove them down from the mountains. But there was something in that sound, in the way the person outside had collapsed rather than knocked, that spoke of genuine need rather than malice. He pulled open the door and immediately felt the full force of the blizzard that had been building all evening, snow driving into his face with stinging fury. At first he saw nothing but white, but then his eyes adjusted and he looked down to find a figure crumpled against his doorframe, covered in snow and ice, trembling violently. The firelight from inside cast an orange glow across green skin, and Zachary felt his breath catch as he realized what he was looking at. An orc. His first instinct was to slam the door, to protect himself, because every story he had ever heard about orcs involved violence and savagery. The orc raiders had destroyed 3 homesteads just last spring, and the garrison commander in the nearest settlement had standing orders to kill orcs on sight. But this orc was clearly dying, shaking so hard that her teeth were chattering audibly, her lips tinged blue despite their natural green hue. She was female, he realized, with features that were somehow both fierce and delicate, her small tusks barely visible between her trembling lips. Her eyes, a striking amber color, opened just enough to meet his, and in them he saw no threat, only a desperate, wordless plea. Zachary made a decision that went against every cautious instinct he had developed living alone in the wilderness. He grabbed the orc under her arms and dragged her inside, grunting with the effort because she was solid muscle despite her clearly starved condition. He kicked the door shut behind them, immediately cutting off the worst of the wind, and pulled her closer to the fire. Her clothes, leather and fur that had once been well made but were now torn and soaked through, were already freezing solid, and he knew if he did not get them off her soon, she would lose fingers and toes to frostbite, if not her life to the cold itself. "Can you hear me?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. He lived alone and often went days without speaking to another soul. "I need to get these wet clothes off you. You are going to freeze to death." The orc's eyes flickered with understanding, and she managed the smallest nod, though she seemed barely conscious. Her shivering had progressed to the point where her whole body convulsed, and Zachary worked quickly, his fingers clumsy with urgency as he unlaced her leather vest and peeled it away. Underneath, she wore a linen shirt that was plastered to her skin, and when he pulled it over her head, he tried not to notice the lean muscles of her shoulders and arms, the way her body bore the scars of someone who had lived a hard life. He averted his eyes as much as possible while still doing what needed to be done, removing her boots and the thick fur pants that were weighted down with ice and snow. He grabbed every blanket he owned, all 3 of them, and wrapped them around her, then pulled her as close to the fire as he dared without risking burns. The root hut was tiny, barely more than a single room carved into the hillside with wooden walls built up around the entrance. It stayed warmer than a regular cabin because of the earth insulation, But on a night like this, even here the cold was winning. Zachary knew that body heat would be more effective than blankets alone, but he hesitated, his sense of propriety warring with the practical knowledge he had gained from surviving harsh winters. The orc made the decision for him by reaching out with one shaking hand and grasping his wrist. "Cold," she managed through chattering teeth. "So cold." He nodded and carefully arranged himself beside her, opening his own coat so that his body warmth could reach her more directly, pulling the blankets around both of them. She instinctively pressed against him, seeking heat, and he forced himself to think only of survival, of keeping another living being from freezing to death in the night. Her skin was like ice against him, and he rubbed her arms and back vigorously, trying to generate warmth through friction. "My name is Zachary," he said, partly to distract himself from the awkwardness of the situation and partly because he thought keeping her conscious was important. "Zachary Denholm, you are safe here. Just focus on getting warm." She did not respond at first, but after several minutes of him working to warm her, she whispered, "Mara. I am Mara Rushthorn." "Well, Mara Rushthorn, you picked a hell of a night to be wandering in the woods," he said, and was rewarded with the smallest huff that might have been an attempt at laughter. "Did not pick it," she managed. "Running. That explains some things." Zachary did not ask from what or whom that conversation could wait until she was no longer in immediate danger of dying. He kept rubbing her arms and back, and gradually, incrementally, her shivering began to lessen. Her skin warmed against his, and her breathing, which had been rapid and shallow, began to deepen and slow. The fire crackled beside them, and outside the wind howled like a living thing, but inside the tiny root hut, they created a small pocket of warmth and safety. Hours passed. Zachary fed the fire whenever it began to die down, carefully extricating himself from Mara's side just long enough to add another log, then returning to share his body heat. She drifted in and out of consciousness, and once, when she seemed more alert, he convinced her to sip some water from his drinking skin. She was severely dehydrated as well as frozen, and he knew that was almost as dangerous as the cold. "When did you last eat?" he asked quietly. 3 days, she whispered. "Maybe 4. Lost track." Zachary looked over at his supplies, which were meager enough. He had come to the frontier to escape a life that had become unbearable after the war, seeking solitude and simplicity. He hunted and trapped for furs to trade, kept a small garden in the summer, and lived on very little. His stores for winter were carefully calculated to last until spring, with no room for excess. But looking at Mara's gaunt face, at the way her collarbone stood out sharply even under the blankets, he knew what he had to do. He reached for the leather pouch where he kept his dried meat venison he had smoked himself the previous autumn. It was tough and salty and not particularly pleasant, but it was protein and calories, and right now that was what Mara needed. He had been rationing it carefully, allowing himself only a few strips per day to supplement the thin soups he made from roots and the occasional rabbit he managed to snare. This pouch represented the last of his meat supplies, and winter was far from over, but the decision was not even difficult. "Here," he said, tearing off a piece of the dried venison and holding it to her lips. "You need to eat something." Mara's eyes opened wider, focusing on the meat with an intensity that spoke of genuine hunger. But then she looked at him, at the nearly empty pouch in his hand, and shook her head weakly. "That is yours, your food. And I am choosing to share it," Zachary said firmly. "You will not recover without eating. Please." She hesitated a moment longer, then opened her mouth and accepted the meat. She chewed slowly, as if her jaw muscles were too weak to work properly, and Zachary fed her several more pieces before she turned her head away. signaling she could take no more. He ate one piece himself, his own stomach was growling, then carefully sealed the pouch and set it aside. He would need to check his snares tomorrow, and maybe try ice fishing if the storm passed. Somehow, he would make it work. The night wore on, and eventually exhaustion claimed them both. Zachary meant to stay awake, to keep watch and tend the fire, but the warmth they had generated together and the sheer emotional drain of the evening pulled him under. He slept sitting up with his back against the wall, Mara tucked against his side, and for the first time in months, he did not dream of the war. He woke to weak sunlight filtering through the gaps in the door, and the fire burned down to embers. The storm had passed, leaving behind the profound silence that always followed a heavy snow. Mara was still asleep, her breathing deep and even, and in the morning light, he could see her properly for the first time. She was young, perhaps close to his own age of 26, though it was hard to tell with orcs. Her green skin was a deep forest shade, darker than he had expected, and her hair, which had dried overnight into a tangled mass, was black as coal and fell past her shoulders. Her tusks were small and somehow elegant, curving up slightly from her lower jaw, and her features, while strong and angular, had a beauty to them that surprised him. He carefully disentangled himself from her and the blankets, moving slowly so as not to wake her, and rebuilt the fire. Then he bundled himself into his heavy coat and boots and stepped outside into a transformed world. Snow had drifted against the hut until it was nearly buried, and the trees sagged under the weight of fresh powder. The sky was a pale, clear blue, the kind that promised brutal cold, and his breath fogged thick in the air. He needed to check his snares and see if any had caught anything overnight, needed to try to find food to replace what he had given Mara. The first 3 snares were empty, and the 4th had been raided by some other predator, leaving only blood in the snow and rabbit fur scattered about. Zachary cursed under his breath and moved on to his fishing spot, a place where the creek ran fast enough that it did not freeze completely, even in the depths of winter. He cleared the snow and broke through the thin ice that had formed overnight, then set up his simple fishing line and settled in to wait. The cold bit through his clothes, and his fingers quickly went numb despite his gloves, but he waited with the patience born of necessity. After nearly an hour, he felt a tug on the line and pulled up a small trout, barely longer than his hand. It was not much, but it was something. He caught 2 more before the fish stopped biting, then headed back to the hut, his breath coming in gasps from the cold and exertion. Mara was awake when he returned, sitting up with the blankets wrapped around her, staring into the fire. She looked up as he entered, and he saw wariness in her amber eyes now, a calculation that had not been there the night before when she was too weak to be anything but vulnerable. "You came back," she said, and there was surprise in her voice. "Of course I came back. I live here," Zachary said, stamping snow off his boots. He held up his string of fish. "And I brought breakfast." He prepared the fish efficiently, gutting them and setting them to cook on sticks propped over the fire. The smell made his stomach clench with hunger. He had not realized how much he had been looking forward to that dried meat until he had given it away. But seeing Mara's eyes follow the cooking fish with desperate intensity, he knew he had made the right choice. When the fish were done, he gave her 2 and kept 1 for himself. She ate ravenously, tearing into the flesh and even eating the crispy skin, and he looked away to give her some privacy in her hunger. His own fish, small as it was, tasted better than anything had in weeks, and he felt some of his strength return with the hot food. "Thank you," Mara said when she had finished, licking the last of the grease from her fingers. "For the food, for last night, for not killing me when you found me." Zachary looked at her directly then. Why would I kill you? She gestured at herself, at her green skin and tusks and pointed ears. Because I am an orc. Because your people and mine have been enemies for longer than either of us has been alive. Because it would have been the smart thing to do. It would have been the cruel thing to do, Zachary corrected quietly. You were dying. I am not going to let someone die on my doorstep just because of what they are. Mara studied him with those penetrating amber eyes, as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth or simply waiting for a better opportunity to betray her. You are strange for a human. I have been called worse, he said with a slight smile. What were you running from? Her expression closed off immediately, and he saw her retreat behind walls of self-protection. That is not your concern. Fair enough, Zachary said, not pushing. But you should know that you are welcome to stay here until you are strong enough to travel safely. That storm last night was just the first of many. Winter has truly set in now, and it would be suicide to try to travel in your condition. I cannot stay, Mara said immediately. If I am found here, it will go badly for you. There are people looking for me, both human and orc. Zachary considered this. He was already harboring an orc in a region where that could get him hanged, so her warning came a bit late. But he found that he did not particularly care. His life before coming to the frontier had taught him that the rules people lived by were often arbitrary and cruel, and he had left civilization behind specifically so he would not have to follow them anymore. Let me worry about that, he said. Right now, you need to recover. You are half-starved and you nearly froze to death. Give yourself at least a few days. Mara looked like she wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. She swayed slightly, exhausted from the simple act of eating and sitting upright, and Zachary moved to steady her. She flinched at his touch, an instinctive reaction, but then forced herself to relax. A few days, she agreed reluctantly. But then I must go. Those few days stretched into a week, then two, as winter tightened its grip on the land and travel became impossible. Zachary checked his snares and fishing lines every day, bringing back what meager food he could find, and Mara slowly regained her strength. At first, she could barely walk, her legs shaking after just a few minutes of being upright, but gradually her natural resilience asserted itself. She began to help around the hut, insisting on doing something to earn her keep despite Zachary's protests that she needed rest. Living in such close quarters, they had no choice but to learn about each other. Zachary discovered that Mara had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard, making him laugh at unexpected moments. She discovered that he was deeply knowledgeable about the woods and survival, but also well-read, with a collection of books he had brought with him from his old life that he would read by firelight in the evenings. She could not read. Orcs had a primarily oral tradition, but she listened with rapt attention when he read aloud, particularly enjoying the old epic poems about heroes and quests. Your human heroes are not so different from ours, she observed one evening. They value courage and loyalty and self-sacrifice. They face impossible odds and triumph through determination. Maybe we are not as different as everyone thinks, Zachary suggested carefully, and saw something shift in her expression, a crack in the armor she kept around herself. That is a dangerous thought, she said softly, for both of us. As the days passed, Zachary found himself increasingly aware of Mara in ways that had nothing to do with her being an orc and everything to do with her being a woman. The way she moved with unconscious grace despite her strength. The sound of her laugh when something genuinely amused her. The fierce intelligence in her eyes when they talked late into the night about philosophy and survival and what it meant to live a good life. He tried to suppress these feelings, knowing they were foolish and dangerous, but they grew stronger despite his best efforts. For her part, Mara was fighting her own internal battle. She had been taught from childhood that humans were weak, treacherous, and cruel, that they would smile to your face while planning to stab you in the back. But Zachary had been nothing but kind to her, sharing his limited food without hesitation, giving her his blankets when he could have kept them for himself, treating her with a respect she had rarely experienced even among her own people. She found herself watching him when he did not know she was looking, noticing the way his hands moved with surety and skill when he prepared food or mended tools, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to her. One morning, nearly 3 weeks after Mara had stumbled into his life, Zachary was out checking his traps when he found tracks in the snow. Large tracks made by heavy boots, and many of them. A group had passed by perhaps an hour ago, heading roughly toward his hut. His heart began to pound as he hurried back, approaching cautiously and silently as he had learned to do during his years as a soldier. He heard voices before he saw the men, 4 of them, rough-looking types in mismatched armor and furs. Bounty hunters or mercenaries, most likely, and they were standing outside his hut, arguing about whether to break in or wait for the occupant to return. "I am telling you, I saw smoke from this place yesterday," one of them was saying. "Someone is living here." "So what?" "We are looking for an orc, not some hermit," another replied. "The orc has to be somewhere, and this would be a good place to hide, middle of nowhere, off the normal paths." Zachary's blood ran cold. They were looking for Mara. He crept closer, trying to determine how he could warn her or draw the men away, when the door to the hut opened and Mara herself stepped out. She had armed herself with his hunting knife, the only weapon in the hut, and her face was set in hard, defiant lines. "You found me," she said flatly. "Now leave the human out of this. Your business is with me." The 4 men spread out, hands going to their weapons. The one who seemed to be the leader, a scarred man with graying hair, shook his head. "Cannot do that, orc. Anyone harboring fugitives is complicit in their crimes. The reward poster says dead or alive for you, but it is just dead for anyone helping you." "He did not know what I was," Mara said, lying smoothly. "I forced him to shelter me. He had no choice." "That is not how the law works out here," the leader said. "Besides, killing you both is just easier." Zachary had heard enough. He stood up from his hiding place behind a snow-covered fallen log and spoke loudly. "I would reconsider that if I were you." All 4 men spun toward him, weapons coming up, but Zachary kept his hands visible and his voice calm. "You are on my land, threatening a guest. I am well within my rights to defend my home." The leader laughed harshly. "One hermit against 4 trained fighters. You want to die for an orc?" "Maybe not," Zachary said. "But ask yourselves if you are willing to die for whatever bounty you are collecting. Because I promise you, I will not go down alone, and fighting in deep snow is exhausting. Is the money really worth it?" There was a long, tense moment where violence hung in the air like a drawn blade. Zachary could see the men calculating odds, weighing profit against risk. He had positioned himself so that any shot they took at him would be uphill through thick underbrush, a difficult shot at best. And while he was unarmed, he had set snares all through these woods and knew every root and stone. If it came to a chase, he had the advantage. "This is not over," the leader finally said. "We will be back with more men, and when we come, we are burning this place to the ground." "I will be waiting," Zachary said, his voice harder than Mara had ever heard it. The 4 men retreated, casting threatening looks back over their shoulders, and Zachary waited until they were completely out of sight before hurrying to Mara. She was trembling, though whether from fear or anger he could not tell. "You should have let them take me," she said, her voice rough. "Now you are marked. They will come back and they will kill you." Then we had better be gone before they return, Zachary said. Pack everything useful. We leave within the hour. Where will we go? Mara asked, but she was already moving, gathering supplies with efficient speed. Deeper into the mountains. There are places up there where no one goes in winter. We can survive there until spring, and by then hopefully whoever is hunting you will have moved on. Why are you doing this? Mara demanded, stopping to face him. You do not owe me anything. I have already cost you your home and your safety. Why sacrifice more? Zachary met her eyes and saw his own answer reflected there, though he was not quite ready to put it into words. Because it is the right thing to do. Because you deserve better than to be hunted like an animal. Because, he hesitated, then finished simply, because I want to. They worked together in tense silence, packing everything they could carry. Food, blankets, cooking supplies, his books wrapped in oilcloth, his tools and weapons. Zachary had a rough idea of where they could go, a cave system he had explored the previous summer, deep enough and well-positioned enough that it could be defended if necessary. It was a hard 2-day journey in good weather, and in the snow it would take longer, but they had no choice. Before they left, Zachary took one last look at the root hut that had been his home for 3 years. It was crude and small, but it had been his sanctuary, the place where he had finally found peace after the horrors of war. Leaving it felt like tearing away a piece of himself, but when he glanced at Mara, he found the loss easier to bear. Some things were worth more than a place to live. They traveled as quickly as the snow allowed, which was not very quick at all. The cold was bitter and the drifts were deep, forcing them to break trail laboriously. Zachary led the way, using a long stick to probe for hidden obstacles, while Mara followed in his footsteps. They spoke little, saving their breath for the exhausting work of moving through winter wilderness. Night fell early, as it did this far north in winter, and they made a rough camp in the lee of a rock outcropping. Zachary dug into the snow to create a windbreak and built the smallest fire he dared, knowing the smoke could give away their position. They ate sparingly some dried fish and a handful of nuts and huddled together for warmth, just as they had that first night. Tell me what you are running from, Zachary said quietly. If we are going to do this together, I need to know what we are facing. Mara was silent for a long time, staring into the small fire. Then, slowly, she began to speak. I was part of a raid clan. We attacked human settlements for supplies and territory. It is what orc clans do, what we have always done. But I began to question it. I saw children killed, families destroyed, and I started asking what we were actually fighting for. My questions made me unpopular with the clan leaders. She paused, her jaw tight with emotion. The final break came 3 months ago. We raided a farmstead and there was a child there, a little girl no more than 6. She had hidden under a table and I found her. The clan leader ordered me to kill her, said it would prevent future enemies. I refused. We fought and I killed him instead. Then I ran. So your own people want you dead for refusing to murder a child, Zachary said slowly. Honor demands it, Mara said bitterly. I killed my clan leader and abandoned my people in the middle of a raid. By orc law, I am a traitor and a coward. Every orc who finds me is obligated to try to kill me. And the humans want me dead for all the raids I did participate in. I am hunted by everyone. Zachary took her hand, the gesture surprising both of them. Her skin was rough with calluses, warm and alive, and her fingers squeezed his almost desperately. You made the right choice. Saving that child was worth everything else. Was it? Mara asked, her voice breaking. Because that child still has her family, but I lost everything. My home, my clan, my purpose. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just died there rather than running. No, Zachary said firmly. The world needs people who will choose mercy over cruelty. What you did took more courage than anything your clan leader ever demanded of you." Mara looked at him, and in the firelight he saw tears tracking down her green cheeks. Without thinking, he reached up and wiped them away with his thumb, and she leaned into his touch with a sound that was almost a sob. They held each other as the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, two outcasts finding solace in shared exile. They reached the cave system late in the afternoon of the third day, exhausted and half frozen but alive. The caves were, as Zachary remembered, a series of connected chambers deep enough to provide real shelter, but with good ventilation, so they would not suffocate from their fire smoke. There was even a small underground stream that provided fresh water year-round. Over the next several days, they transformed the caves into a livable space. Zachary built a proper hearth from stones gathered from the stream bed, creating a chimney effect that drew the smoke up and out through a natural crack in the cave ceiling. Mara used her considerable strength to help him move larger rocks and logs, constructing walls to block the wind in the outer chambers. They gathered pine boughs for bedding and hung their supplies from the ceiling to protect them from any animals that might wander in. The work was exhausting but also satisfying, and Zachary found himself appreciating how well he and Mara worked together. She anticipated what he needed often before he asked, and he did the same for her. They developed a rhythm, a wordless communication that came from focusing on shared goals. One evening, as they sat by their fire eating a stew made from rabbit Zachary had snared and wild onions Mara had found growing under the snow, she said, "I cannot remember the last time I felt safe." Zachary looked at her. "Do you feel safe now, with you?" "Yes," she said, meeting his eyes. "Which is strange, because you are human and I was raised to believe humans could never be trusted. But you have proven everything I was taught wrong. And you have done the same for me," Zachary admitted. "I was told orcs were mindless savages who knew only violence. But you are thoughtful and brave and kind. You risked your own life to save a child, and then you risked it again to try to protect me from those bounty hunters." They were sitting close, as they always did for warmth, but now the small space between them felt charged with something more than simple survival. Mara's eyes searched his face, and he saw vulnerability there, a desperate hope that she seemed afraid to acknowledge. "This is foolish," she whispered. "There is no future for us. Even if we survive the winter, even if the people hunting me give up, where could we go? What could we be to each other?" "I do not know," Zachary said honestly, "but I know what you already are to me. You are the first person in years who makes me want to hope again, who makes me think that maybe I do not have to spend the rest of my life alone." "Zachary," she began, but he shook his head. "You do not have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. Whatever happens, whatever you decide, I will not regret a single moment of this." Mara made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then she was kissing him. It was clumsy and desperate and perfect, and Zachary wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close, marveling at how right she felt against him. Her tusks bumped his face, and he found he did not care, found he loved even that strange detail that marked her as different. She was strong and fierce and beautiful, and he wanted her more than he had wanted anything in his entire life. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and Mara rested her forehead against his. "This is the most foolish thing I have ever done," she said. "Good," Zachary replied. "I was worried you might be making too many wise decisions lately." She laughed, a real laugh full of joy, and kissed him again. This time it was slower, deeper, an exploration and a promise. When they finally pulled apart again, the fire had burned low and the cave was full of shadows, but neither of them noticed the cold. That night, They lay together under their blankets, not as desperate refugees sharing body heat, but as two people who had chosen each other, despite every reason not to. Zachary held Mara close and listened to her breathing even out as she fell asleep, and he felt something he had not felt since before the war: genuine happiness. Winter deepened around their cave, bringing storms that lasted days and temperatures cold enough to kill. But inside, Zachary and Mara built a life together. They established routines. He would check the snares and hunting trails while she would fish in the underground stream or gather pine nuts from the trees near the cave entrance. In the evenings, they would cook together, then sit by the fire while Zachary read aloud from his books or Mara told stories from Orc tradition, epic tales of heroes and tricksters that had been passed down for generations. They talked about everything. Zachary told her about the war, about the things he had seen and done that had driven him to seek solitude. He had been a soldier in a pointless border conflict, following orders that made no sense, watching good people die for the ambitions of lords who saw them as nothing more than game pieces. He had earned commendations for bravery, but all he felt was guilt for surviving when so many others had not. Mara shared her own history, talking about growing up in an Orc clan where strength was everything and questioning the old ways was seen as weakness. She had loved her people, had believed in their cause, but that belief had eroded with each raid, each act of cruelty justified by tradition. The choice to spare that child had not been impulsive, it had been the culmination of years of growing doubt. "You miss them?" Zachary asked one night. "Your clan, despite everything?" "Sometimes," Mara admitted. "I miss the sense of belonging. Even when I disagreed with them, I knew my place. Now I am adrift." "You are not adrift," Zachary said, taking her hand. "You are here with me, and as long as you want to be, this is your home." She looked at him with such naked love that it took his breath away. "I want to be here more than I have ever wanted anything, but I am afraid that wanting it so much means it will be taken away." "Then we will fight to keep it," Zachary said, "together." As winter wore on, they grew stronger both physically and as a unit. The meager existence they led forced them to be resourceful and resilient. Mara taught Zachary techniques from Orc hunting tradition, how to read subtle signs in the forest, how to move silently over any terrain, how to track prey by scent as well as sight. Zachary taught her to raid, painstakingly working through the basics until she could sound out words in his books, her face lighting up with triumph each time she successfully decoded a sentence. They sparred together in the cave, teaching each other fighting techniques from their respective traditions. Zachary had formal military training, efficient and brutal, while Mara knew the free-flowing, powerful style of Orc warriors. They pushed each other, learning and adapting, and more than once their sparring sessions ended with them kissing breathlessly, training forgotten. The physical relationship between them deepened naturally, becoming another way they communicated and connected. In their makeshift bed of pine boughs and blankets, they found comfort and pleasure and a profound intimacy that neither had experienced before. Mara was amazed at how gentle Zachary could be, how he treated her as precious despite her strength. Zachary loved discovering all the ways Mara was both similar to and different from human women, learning what made her gasp and tremble in his arms. But their sanctuary could not remain untouched forever. In late winter, when the worst of the storms had passed, but the ground was still deep in snow, Zachary returned from checking his traps to find Mara standing at the cave entrance, staring out at the forest with tension in every line of her body. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately. "Someone is out there," she said quietly. "I heard them about an hour ago, multiple people moving through the woods. They are searching for something." Zachary felt his stomach drop. The bounty hunters, maybe, or another orc clan, I cannot tell yet. She looked at him. We should run. Head deeper into the mountains. In this snow they will track us easily, Zachary said, thinking quickly. And we would be exposed on the mountain. Here we have shelter and defensive advantages. If we must fight, better to do it on ground we know. Mara nodded slowly. You are right. But Zachary, these people are coming to kill us. If it is a fight, it will be to the death. I know, he said, and was surprised to find he was calm. A year ago, the thought of more violence would have filled him with dread and disgust, but this was different. He was not fighting for abstract political goals or following orders he disagreed with. He was protecting his home and the woman he loved, and there was a clarity to that which gave him strength. They prepared as best they could. Zachary had his bow and a quiver of arrows he had made over the winter, along with his hunting knife. Mara had fashioned herself a spear from a straight branch, and a blade Zachary had traded for years ago. They moved their supplies to the deepest chamber of the cave, creating a fallback position, and then they waited. The searchers came as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow. There were 6 of them, and to Zachary's shock, they were a mixed group, 3 humans and 3 orcs, working together. The leader was a tall human woman with frost in her dark hair and a sword at her hip, and beside her walked a massive orc male with scars crisscrossing his arms and chest. We know you are in there, the woman called out, stopping a respectful distance from the cave entrance. Mara Rushthorn, daughter of the Rushthorn clan, you have been found. Come out and face judgment. Mara stepped into view, her spear held ready. I will face your judgment when it is given by someone with the right to judge. You have no authority over me. The Alliance gives us authority, the scarred orc said. His voice was deep and resonant. Human and orc working together to hunt down those who break our laws. You murdered your clan leader and abandoned your people in battle. You must answer for that. I refuse to murder a child, Mara shot back. If that is a crime in your eyes, then I am guilty and proud of it. It is not about the child, the human woman said, and her voice was weary rather than angry. It is about the fact that you killed your leader and fled. By orc law, that is treason. By human law, you are wanted for the raids you participated in. We cannot let either crime go unanswered. Zachary moved to stand beside Mara, his bow strung and ready. She is under my protection. If you want her, you will have to go through me. The 6 searchers exchanged glances, and the human woman sighed. Zachary Denholm, former soldier of the Northern Legions, we know who you are. This does not have to involve you. Step aside and you can go free. No, Zachary said simply. Then you will die with her, the scarred orc said, and there was almost regret in his voice. We take no joy in this, but the law is the law. The law is often wrong, Zachary replied. And I am tired of following it just because someone tells me I should. The standoff stretched, tense and fragile. Then one of the human men in the group shifted, reaching for his weapon, and everything happened at once. Zachary loosed his first arrow, taking the man in the shoulder and spinning him around. Mara charged forward with her spear, engaging the scarred orc in a clash of wood and muscle. The other searchers surged toward the cave entrance, and Zachary fired arrow after arrow, forcing them to take cover. The fighting was brutal and chaotic. Mara held the cave entrance against 2 opponents at once, her spear a blur of motion, her orc strength allowing her to drive them back despite being outnumbered. Zachary provided cover, his arrows keeping the others pinned, but he was running out of ammunition fast. When his quiver was empty, he dropped the bow and drew his knife, moving to Mara's side. Back to back, they fought with desperate determination. Zachary used every dirty trick he had learned in the war, targeting vulnerable spots, and using the confined space of the cave entrance to neutralize his opponent's numbers advantage. Mara fought with the fury of someone defending everything she had left in the world, her spear singing through the air. Blood stained the snow, and Zachary took a cut across his ribs that burned like fire, but he did not slow down. Beside him, Mara had a gash on her arm but seemed not to notice, her focus absolute. The searchers were skilled, but they had not expected such fierce resistance, and in the narrow confines of the cave entrance, their numbers were actually a disadvantage. The fight turned when one of the human searchers slipped on blood-slick stone and went down hard. Mara immediately disarmed him, and Zachary put his knife to the fallen man's throat. "Stop," he shouted, "or your friend dies." Everyone froze. The human woman, the leader, lowered her sword slowly, breathing hard. Blood ran from a cut on her cheek. "Let him go. We will talk." "Throw down your weapons first," Zachary demanded. After a long moment, the searchers complied, dropping swords and knives in the snow. Zachary helped the man up but kept his knife ready. "Now talk. What is this alliance you mentioned? Why are humans and orcs working together?" The woman wiped blood from her face. "Things are changing. The old wars, the constant raiding and retaliation, both sides have realized they are destroying each other. Some leaders on both sides have begun trying to establish peace. But peace requires law, and law requires enforcement. We are part of that enforcement. Hunting down those who commit crimes against the Alliance. And you think dragging Mara back to be executed will help establish peace?" Zachary asked incredulously. "She killed her clan leader," the scarred orc said. "If we ignore that, we show that leadership can be challenged with violence. That invites chaos." "She refused an immoral order," Zachary countered. "She chose mercy over brutality. If your alliance cannot distinguish between that and actual treason, then your alliance is built on the same rotten foundation as the old ways." The human woman and the scarred orc exchanged looks. "What would you have us do?" the woman asked. "We have our orders. We cannot simply let her go." "Then change your orders," Mara said, speaking for the first time since the fighting stopped. "If humans and orcs can work together in your alliance, then there must be room for those who question the old ways. I am not asking for forgiveness. I know I participated in raids that hurt people. But I stopped. I chose a different path. Is there no place in your new world for people who change?" The scarred orc was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "There is an old orc tradition, trial by challenge. If you can prove your worth through single combat, your crimes are considered paid in blood. I could invoke that tradition on your behalf." "And what would that look like?" Mara asked warily. "You would fight me," the orc said. "If you win, you are declared clean of your crimes by orc law. I cannot speak for the human charges, but—" He looked at the woman. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If the orcs clear her, we can make the argument that she was following orc law and culture, which the Alliance has agreed to respect. It would not be a full pardon, but it would likely be enough to stop active pursuit." "And if I lose?" Mara asked. "Then you die in honorable combat, which is better than an execution," the scarred orc said bluntly. Zachary started to protest, but Mara put a hand on his arm. "It is a fair offer, and it may be the only way to end this." She looked at the scarred orc. "I accept your challenge." They established rules quickly. Single combat, fought with staves rather than lethal weapons, first blood or submission determining the winner. The other searchers cleared a space in the snow outside the cave, and Zachary helped Mara prepare, checking her wounds and giving her water. "You do not have to do this," he said quietly. "We can run again, we can keep running." "And spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders," Mara shook her head. "No, this ends today one way or another." "Then win." Zachary said fiercely, pulling her close. Because I am not ready to lose you. She kissed him, hard and quick, then stepped into the makeshift arena. The scarred orc was waiting, a staff in his hands, his expression serious but not unkind. "What is your name?" Mara asked him. "Gruck Ironheart," he replied. "And I want you to know I take no pleasure in this, but I will not hold back. If you want to survive, you must earn it." "I understand," Mara said, raising her own staff. They circled each other, and then Gruck attacked. He was fast for his size, his staff whistling through the air with crushing force. Mara blocked and dodged, giving ground, testing his patterns. Gruck had formal training, techniques honed through years of practice. But Mara had something else: desperation and love, and the absolute determination not to lose everything she had found. The fight was intense. Gruck landed blows that would have broken bones on a weaker opponent, but Mara absorbed them and kept fighting, her own strikes fast and precise. She targeted his joints, trying to slow him down, while he went for power shots that would end the fight if they connected cleanly. Zachary watched with his heart in his throat, unable to look away despite the fear that gripped him. Mara was holding her own, but Gruck was larger and stronger, and it was only a matter of time before that advantage told. Then he saw Mara shift her stance slightly. Recognizing a pattern, Gruck favored his right side, always following a high strike with a sweep to the left. The next time Gruck raised his staff high, Mara was ready. Instead of blocking, she ducked under the strike and rolled right, coming up behind him. Before he could turn, she struck the back of his knee, buckling his leg, and then swept her staff across his shoulders, driving him face first into the snow. She immediately planted her foot on his back and her staff across his neck, not enough pressure to injure but enough to make her dominance clear. "You submit?" she asked, breathing hard. There was a long moment of silence. Then Gruck tapped the ground with his hand twice, the traditional orc signal of submission. "I submit. You have proven your worth, Mara Rushthorn." Mara stepped back and Gruck rose slowly, rotating his shoulder with a grimace. But when he looked at her, there was respect in his eyes. "The orc charges against you are cleared. You have paid your debt in blood and combat." The human woman stepped forward. "And as senior member of the Alliance present, I am declaring that the human charges are dropped as well on grounds of cultural misjudgment. However," she looked directly at Mara, "if you return to raiding, if you break the peace in any way, this pardon is void and we will hunt you to the ends of the earth." "Am I clear?" "Perfectly clear," Mara said. "But I have no intention of raiding ever again. That life is behind me." The woman nodded. "Then we are done here." She looked at her team. "Gather the weapons and tend to wounds. We head back in the morning." As the searchers retreated to make camp at a respectful distance, Zachary pulled Mara into a fierce embrace. "You did it. You are free." "We are free," Mara corrected, her face buried against his shoulder. "Finally free." That night they held each other close in their cave, listening to the wind outside and the murmur of voices from the searchers' camp. Tomorrow those people would leave, and the threat that had hung over them would be gone. The future, which had seemed impossible just hours ago, was suddenly real and within reach. "What do we do now?" Mara asked softly. "The Alliance is real, humans and orcs working together. Maybe there is a place for us in that new world." "Maybe," Zachary agreed. "But I do not think I want to live in settlements or follow someone else's rules again. I like it out here, away from everything." Would you want to stay, build a life here together?" Mara pulled back to look at him, her amber eyes searching his face. "You would truly want that? A life with me, alone in the wilderness?" "I cannot imagine anything I would want more," Zachary said honestly. "You are everything to me, Mara. You make me want to wake up in the morning." You make me believe that good things are still possible. I love you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too, more than I thought I could ever love anyone. Yes, I want to stay here with you. I want to build a life that is ours, that we choose together." They kissed as the fire burned low, and the night deepened around them. Two people who had been broken by their worlds finding wholeness in each other. When spring came, transforming the frozen landscape into something green and living, Zachary and Mara emerged from their cave sanctuary. The searchers had long since departed, and the woods were empty of threats. Together, they worked to build a proper cabin on a beautiful meadow near the cave, using techniques from both human and orc tradition to create something stronger than either could have built alone. Word of their relationship spread slowly through both human and orc communities, carried by traders and travelers who passed through the region. Some condemned them as traitors to their respective peoples, but others saw them as symbols of what the alliance could achieve, proof that the old hatreds did not have to define the future. Occasionally, visitors would arrive at their homestead. Usually they were alliance members checking to make sure Mara was keeping her word about not raiding. But sometimes they were others like her orcs who had questioned the old ways, or humans who had grown tired of hatred and violence. Zachary and Mara welcomed them all, offering food and shelter and proof that a different kind of life was possible. One summer evening, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sun set over the mountains, Mara leaned her head on Zachary's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it? Giving up your solitude for this?" "For me?" Zachary wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Not for a single moment. That night when you collapsed at my door, frozen and desperate, that was the night my real life began. Everything before was just surviving. This is living." "I brought you nothing but trouble," Mara said, but she was smiling. "You brought me everything," Zachary corrected. "Love, purpose, hope. A reason to believe the world can change. What is a little trouble compared to that?" They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to emerge in the deepening blue of the sky. In the distance, an owl called, and somewhere closer a fox yipped in the underbrush. The sounds of the wilderness that was their home, the place where two people from enemy peoples had found love and peace. As autumn approached again, nearly a full year since Mara had first stumbled into Zachary's life, they received an unexpected visitor. Gruck Ironheart arrived alone, his hands empty of weapons, and requested permission to speak with them. They invited him in and offered food, and he accepted with solemn courtesy. "I have a message from the Alliance Council," he said when they were settled around their table. "They have been watching you both. You have kept your word, lived peacefully, and you have helped others seeking to bridge the divide between our peoples. The Council wants to formally recognize your union and offer you a position as liaisons, people who can speak to both humans and orcs, who can help others learn to coexist as you have." Zachary and Mara exchanged glances. "What would that involve?" Zachary asked carefully. "Travel sometimes. Meeting with clan leaders and settlement elders, telling your story and helping mediate disputes. But you would not be required to leave your home permanently. You could maintain your life here and help the Alliance when needed. There would be compensation, food, supplies, protection." Mara leaned forward. "And why would the Alliance trust us with this? We are both outcasts." "Because you are outcasts," Gruck said. "You do not belong to either side fully, which means you can speak to both without appearing to favor one over the other." And because he hesitated, then continued, "Because seeing you together gives people hope. It shows that change is possible. That is worth more than you know." They talked long into the night, asking questions and raising concerns. When Gruck finally left the next morning, he did so with their tentative agreement to try the liaison role, with the understanding that they could walk away if it became too much. Over the months that followed, Zachary and Mara discovered they had a talent for the work. They traveled to orc clans where Zachary's presence, as a respected human, helped ease tensions, and to human settlements where Mara's direct honesty broke through prejudice. They told their story countless times, how a desperate orc had found shelter with a lonely human, how kindness had sparked understanding, how understanding had grown into love. Not everyone accepted them. There were still those on both sides who clung to the old hatreds, who saw their relationship as betrayal or perversion. Once, a group of human extremists tried to ambush them on a mountain road, and Zachary took an arrow in the shoulder before Mara drove them off with a fury that reminded him why orcs had such fearsome reputations. Another time, they encountered an orc war band that would have killed them both had Gruck not arrived with alliance reinforcements at a crucial moment. But slowly, incrementally, things changed. Mixed settlements began to appear, places where humans and orcs lived side by side, trading skills and knowledge. Interspecies marriages, while still rare, were no longer unheard of. The alliance grew stronger, its laws more sophisticated, its reach more extensive. Through it all, Zachary and Mara remained anchored to each other and to their home in the mountains. No matter how far they traveled or how many people they helped, they always returned to their cabin in the meadow, to the place where their love had taken root and flourished. 2 years after that desperate winter night, they formalized their union in a ceremony that blended human and orc traditions. Gruck officiated, and representatives from both peoples attended, standing together as witnesses. Mara wore flowers in her hair and a dress of green that matched her skin, and Zachary wore his best clothes with an orc blessing tattoo freshly inked on his forearm. They exchanged vows in both languages, promising to love and protect each other for as long as they lived. The celebration lasted 2 days, with human musicians and orc drummers creating music that was both strange and beautiful. People danced together who would have killed each other just a few years prior, and when Zachary and Mara stood before their guests, their hands clasped together, there were tears on faces both green and fair. "You have given us a gift," Gruck said in his speech, "the gift of possibility. You showed us that the divide between our peoples is not as wide or as permanent as we thought. You proved that love is stronger than fear. For that, we thank you." As the celebration wound down and the guests departed, Zachary and Mara found themselves alone again, standing outside their cabin under a sky full of stars. Mara rested her hand on her belly, where a new life was just beginning to grow, their child, who would be something entirely new, a bridge between worlds. "Are you afraid?" Zachary asked quietly, following her gesture. "Terrified," Mara admitted. "We are creating something unprecedented. A child of both peoples. They will face challenges we cannot even imagine. But they will also have advantages we never had," Zachary said, placing his hand over hers. "They will grow up knowing that both halves of their heritage are valuable. They will be raised with love instead of hatred. And they will have us to protect them and teach them." "Yes," Mara agreed, leaning against him. "They will have us, and that will have to be enough." The seasons turned, and Mara's pregnancy progressed without complication. Their child was born on a spring morning when the meadow was covered in wildflowers, arriving with a lusty cry that announced her determination to be heard. She was perfect, small and strong, with skin that was a lighter shade of green than her mother's and her father's warm brown eyes. They named her Elara, a name that existed in both human and orc languages, meaning hope and new beginning. Raising Elara was both a joy and a challenge. She was curious and fearless, scrambling over rocks almost as soon as she could walk, demanding stories and attention with the imperious nature of toddlers everywhere. Zachary taught her to read and to identify plants and animals, while Mara taught her orc songs and the basics of fighting with a staff. She learned both languages simultaneously, switching between them without apparent effort. When Alara was 3, they received news that the Alliance had officially recognized children of mixed heritage as full citizens of both peoples, with all rights and protections. It was a small victory but a significant one, and Zachary and Mara knew it was partly due to their work, to the example they had set. Other mixed couples began to seek them out, asking for advice and support. Zachary and Mara welcomed them, sharing what they had learned and helping establish a network of families like theirs. Their cabin became a gathering place, a symbol of the new world that was slowly being built. As Alara grew, so did the peace. Trade routes opened between human and orc territories. Joint settlements thrived. The Alliance Council grew more sophisticated, with representatives from both peoples working together to address problems that had once seemed insurmountable. There were still conflicts and setbacks. Centuries of hatred did not disappear overnight, but the overall trajectory was toward understanding and cooperation. On the night of their 5th anniversary, Zachary and Mara sat on their porch as they had so many times before, watching Alara play in the meadow, chasing fireflies with shouts of glee. The cabin had expanded over the years, gaining rooms and amenities, but the heart of it remained the same: the central room with its stone hearth, where they had spent that first desperate winter falling in love. "You remember that night?" Mara asked softly. "When I collapsed at your door, certain I was going to die." "I remember everything," Zachary said. "The way you looked, half frozen and terrified, the decision to bring you inside which should have been harder than it was. Sharing my last dried meat with you because I could not stand the thought of you going hungry." "That meat was terrible," Mara said with a laugh. "It was," Zachary agreed, "but it was also everything I had, and I gave it freely. Because even then, before I knew you, before I loved you, I could see that you were worth saving." "You saved me in more ways than you know," Mara said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me shelter and food, yes, but more than that, you gave me hope. You showed me that there was another way to live, another kind of person to be. You believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. And you saved me right back," Zachary said, pulling her close. "I was so lonely before you came, so lost. I thought I wanted solitude, but what I really wanted was purpose. You gave me that. You and Alara and this life we have built together." They sat in silence for a while, watching their daughter play as the stars emerged overhead. In the distance, they could hear the sound of neighbors, a human family and an orc clan who had built homes nearby calling their children in for the night. The sounds of a community at peace. "We did it," Mara said wonderingly. "Against all odds, against everyone who said it was impossible, we built something good." "We did," Zachary agreed. "And it all started with one small act of kindness on a frozen winter night, with choosing compassion over fear." Alara ran up to them then, demanding to be lifted so she could see the stars better. Zachary scooped her up, settling her between himself and Mara, and together they pointed out constellations, telling her the stories that went with them, some human, some orc, all precious. As the night deepened and Alara's questions finally began to slow, Zachary felt a profound sense of contentment settle over him. This was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of struggle or challenge, but the presence of love and purpose. The knowledge that what you were doing mattered, that the choices you made rippled outward and changed the world. Eventually, they carried a sleepy Alara inside and tucked her into her bed, listening to her mumbled requests for just one more story. Mara sang her an old orc lullaby, and Zachary held her hand until her breathing deepened into true sleep. Then they retreated to their own room, to the bed they had shared for years now, and held each other close. "I love you," Mara whispered in the darkness, "more than I have words to express." "I love you too," Zachary replied, "always and forever." Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the promise of winter to come. But inside their cabin, warmth and love kept the cold at bay, just as they had on that first desperate night when a shivering orc had found shelter in a tiny root hut, and a lonely human had chosen kindness over fear. That single choice had changed everything, had created ripples that spread far beyond what either of them could have imagined. In the years that followed, their story became legend, the tale of the human and the orc who had bridged an impossible divide through simple compassion. Children of both peoples grew up hearing about Zachary and Mara, about how love could transcend hatred, how one act of kindness could change the world. Their story was told in taverns and around campfires, in orc gathering halls and human meeting houses, inspiring others to question the old prejudices and seek new paths. As Alara grew into a remarkable young woman, strong and compassionate like her mother, clever and kind like her father, she became a symbol herself of what the future could hold. She worked alongside her parents as a liaison, but she also pushed further, advocating for deeper integration and understanding. She established schools where human and orc children learned together, where differences were celebrated rather than feared. Zachary and Mara watched their daughter's accomplishments with pride, but they remained grounded in the simple life they had built together. They still hunted and gathered, still maintained their cabin with their own hands, still found joy in quiet evenings by the fire. The fame their story had brought them never changed. Who they were at their core, two people who had chosen each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that choice. On an autumn evening 20 years after that fateful winter night, Zachary and Mara sat on their porch watching the sun set, their hair now touched with gray, their bodies marked by time and labor but still strong. Alara was visiting with her own partner, a kind human man who loved her fiercely. And from inside, they could hear laughter and the sounds of dinner being prepared. "If I could go back," Mara said suddenly, "to that night when I was dying in the snow, and I could see everything that would come from your kindness, the love, the family, the peace we helped build, I am not sure I would believe it was possible." "Neither would I," Zachary admitted. "It all seemed so impossible, but we did it anyway. We chose hope when despair would have been easier. We chose love when hate would have been safer, and look what we created." He gestured at the view before them, the meadow golden in the fading light, the mountains rising purple and majestic in the distance, and beyond, smoke rising from the chimneys of the mixed settlement that had grown up nearby. A settlement where humans and orcs lived side by side, working together, raising children together, building a future together. "Sometimes I think about all the people whose lives are different because you opened your door that night," Mara said softly. "All the couples like us who have found the courage to love across species lines. All the children who are growing up without the hatred that defined our childhoods. All the communities that have chosen peace over war. It all traces back to one act of simple human decency." "Or simple orc stubbornness," Zachary added with a smile. "If you had not kept walking through that storm, if you had given up and let the cold take you, none of this would have happened." "Then I am glad I am too stubborn to die when it is inconvenient," Mara said, and they both laughed. Alara called them in for dinner then, and they rose slowly. their bodies no longer as young and flexible as they once were, but their spirits still strong. They went inside to join their family, to share food and stories and laughter, to celebrate another day of the miraculous, ordinary life they had built together. As they sat around the table, passing dishes and teasing each other, Zachary caught Mara's eye across the table and saw reflected there everything they had been through, everything they had overcome, everything they had created. He saw the scared, desperate orc who had collapsed at his door. He saw the fierce warrior who had fought off bounty hunters to protect him. He saw the loving mother who sang lullabies in 2 languages. He saw the woman he had loved for 2 decades and would love until his last breath. She smiled at him, that private smile that was just for him, and he smiled back, and no words were needed. They had said everything that mattered on that first night, when he had shared the last of his dried meat with a stranger who needed it. When he had chosen kindness over fear, compassion over caution, hope over hatred, that choice had been the beginning of everything good in his life. It had brought him love and family and purpose. It had helped change the world, one small act at a time. And as he sat surrounded by the people he loved most, in the home he had built with his own hands, and the woman he had built a life with, Zachary knew he would make that same choice again in a heartbeat. Because in the end, that was what love was, choosing someone else's welfare over your own comfort, again and again, in small ways and large. It was sharing your last piece of food with someone who was hungry. It was opening your door to a stranger in a storm. It was building a life together against impossible odds and refusing to let the world tear you apart. The night deepened around their cabin, and inside, the fire burned warm and bright, holding back the darkness. Outside, the first stars emerged in the clear autumn sky, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled its lonely song. But inside, there was no loneliness, only love and laughter and the deep contentment that comes from knowing you are exactly where you are supposed to be, with exactly who you are supposed to be with. Years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. Zachary and Mara grew old together, their bodies aging but their love only deepening with time. They became elders of their community, sought out for wisdom and counsel, their story a touchstone for younger generations learning to navigate the complexities of the changing world. They watched as the alliance grew stronger, as mixed communities became the norm rather than the exception, as the very idea of humans and orcs as eternal enemies began to seem like ancient history. They saw Alara become a mother herself, bringing grandchildren into the world, beautiful, strong children who carried both human and orc heritage with pride. Through it all, they remained anchored to each other and to the place where their love had begun. The cabin in the meadow, the cave in the mountains where they had hidden that desperate winter, the woods where Zachary had once lived in solitude, all of it was sacred ground to them, marked by memory and meaning. On quiet evenings when the world was still and peaceful, they would sit together and remember. Remember that first night when everything had hung in the balance. Remember the fear and the hope, the desperation and the courage. Remember the moment when 2 people from enemy peoples had looked at each other and seen not a monster or an enemy, but simply another person in need of help and worthy of love. And they would hold each other close and give thanks for the choices they had made, for the life they had built, for every precious moment they had been given together. Because that was the real miracle, not that the world had changed, though it had, but that 2 lonely, broken people had found each other in the darkness and created light. That was the story they passed down to their children and grandchildren, the lesson they taught to everyone who would listen. Love was not easy, and change was not simple, but both were possible if you were brave enough to try. If you were willing to open your door to a stranger in the cold. If you were willing to share the last of what you had with someone who needed it more. If you were willing to choose hope over fear, again and again, no matter how hard it became. Zachary and Mara lived long lives, blessed with health and happiness and surrounded by people who loved them. When the end finally came for Zachary, in the fullness of his years, Mara held his hand and reminded him of all they had shared, all they had built together. And when he took his last breath, it was with a smile on his face, at peace with the life he had lived and the love he had known. Mara followed him not long after, her fierce heart finally giving out after decades of beating strong and true. She died in the cabin they had built together, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and her last words were a blessing in the Orc tongue, thanking the spirits for giving her Zachary and the life they had shared. They were buried together in the meadow they had loved, under the pine trees that sang in the wind, and people came from across the Alliance lands to pay their respects. Humans and orcs stood side by side, united in their grief and in their gratitude for the couple who had shown them a better way forward. In the years after their deaths, their story only grew in the telling, becoming a foundational myth of the Alliance, a reminder of where they had come from and what they were building toward. The cabin was preserved as a historical site, and people would make pilgrimages there to see where the legendary love story had unfolded. They would stand in the little root hut where it all began and marvel that something so small and humble could be the birthplace of something so transformative. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the pines and the stars shone bright overhead, those who were sensitive to such things would swear they could feel the presence of two souls still bound together, still watching over the land they had loved and the people they had helped bring together. A human and an orc, united in death as they had been in life, their love eternal and their legacy woven into the very fabric of a world they had helped transform. The story of how Zachary warmed the shivering orc in his tiny root hut, sharing the last of his dried meat, became more than just a tale of romance. It became a parable about compassion, about seeing the person rather than the label, about choosing kindness in the face of fear. It was taught to children as they learned to read, dramatized in festivals and celebrations, referenced in political speeches and peace negotiations. And always, always, it came back to that central truth that the largest changes often begin with the smallest acts of grace. That one person choosing to be kind, choosing to help, choosing to love, can set in motion ripples that transform everything. That we are all capable of being the change we wish to see, if only we are brave enough to try. The Alliance continued to grow and thrive, building on the foundation that Zachary and Mara and countless others like them had laid. There were still challenges, still conflicts, still those who clung to the old hatreds. But the momentum was toward unity, toward understanding, toward a future where human and orc children played together without fear, where mixed families were celebrated rather than condemned, where love was stronger than prejudice. And in that meadow in the mountains, where two graves lay side by side under the whispering pines, the wildflowers bloomed every spring in riotous color. Green and gold, purple and white, they covered the ground like a living tapestry, a memorial to love that had transcended every boundary and changed the world. People would come and leave offerings, flowers, and tokens, prayers and promises, and in the quiet of that sacred place, they would remember what was possible when you chose hope over hatred, love over fear, compassion over cruelty. The story lived on, generation after generation, a light in the darkness, a reminder that no divide is too great to bridge if people are willing to try. And it all began with one simple act on one frozen night, a human man opening his door to a dying orc, choosing to see her not as an enemy but as a person in desperate need, and sharing with her the last of what he had. That was how the world changed. Not through grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but through small acts of kindness multiplied across thousands of hearts and millions of moments. One person helping another, one act of generosity inspiring others, one love story proving that barriers could be broken and a better future built. And so the tale of Zachary and Mara lived on, immortal in its simplicity and profound in its message, a beacon for all those who came after, showing them the way toward a world where differences were celebrated, where love conquered fear, and where every person, regardless of their origin, could find warmth and welcome in another's home and heart.